whole series is about, do we dare to live like Jesus? Do we dare to live like Jesus? Because Jesus taught and lived some very hard and difficult things, some very difficult truths. He taught us, as we learned last week, that if we want to be Christians, if we want to be His disciples, then we must prioritize Him above everything, above our dreams, above our closest relationships, above our reputation, above our finances. Whatever it is, if at any point those things come in conflict with following Jesus, we are to sacrifice those things. And if we're unwilling to do so, we cannot be His disciple. We cannot follow Him, because He has to be the priority. Now, that's a difficult truth. But here's the thing. Here's the upside to that. With our sacrifice, when we follow Jesus, when we make Him the priority and the leader over our life, we get some things in return. We get forgiveness for all of our sins. We get the power to live a new life here on this earth, a life that we can be proud of. And if that wasn't enough, we get the promise of eternity in heaven with God. But we've got to put Jesus as the priority. Now, Jesus didn't just tell us how to put God first and to make sacrifices. He modeled this kind of life for us. He modeled this lifestyle of putting God first. He did it Himself. He's our example. So what we're going to do through this series is we're going to look at some things that Jesus taught and some things that He modeled, and we're going to ask the question, do we dare to follow Jesus? Do we dare follow Jesus? Today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to handle people in need. When we come in contact with people in need, what do we do? How should we respond? How should we respond? Because let's be honest. When we face someone in need, when I say someone in need, what I'm talking about, I know automatically we think of, homeless people, right? Especially in Modesto, we have a huge homeless problem. I'm not really talking about that. That's one aspect. I'm talking about people in need. I'm talking about when you're in the grocery store line and you see a single mom and she's got her kids and she's trying to pay for her groceries, and then they ring it all up and she's short. She doesn't have enough to pay for it all. That's somebody in need. I'm talking about the guy on the side of the road where his car breaks down and you're driving by and you see that and you know he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to change the tire. He doesn't know how to fix the problem. That's somebody in need. Talking about the person in church, the person that you've sat next to, and you learn that they don't have enough money to make rent. That's somebody in need. So how do we approach this? What do we do? I'll tell you, the truth is that we typically don't want to get involved. We don't want to, we feel guilty, right? We think we should do something, but we don't know what to do. And the truth is it's easier to just walk away, avoid the problem, right? Oh, I don't want to get close to that, I don't want to get involved. It's too messy, it's too whatever. I just would rather not. It's inconvenient, right? It's easier to walk away. And I'm preaching to myself here. I'm saying this is how I respond sometimes. It's just easier to walk away. It's easier to ignore the problem. But here's the question that we have to ask ourselves. Here's the question of this series. What does Jesus teach us to do when we are faced with someone in need? And then the real question of this series is, do we dare to follow his teaching? Do we dare to follow him? Here's what Jesus teaches. He gives a great example in the Bible about how to handle somebody when you see somebody in need. This is it. This is Jesus' teaching. One day, a religious leader comes to him and tries to test him. They're always trying to test Jesus, and he always, comes out on top. But this religious leader, he asked Jesus what he needs to do in order to be saved, in order to have eternal life, right? And listen to Jesus' response in Luke chapter 10, verse 25 through 37. This is what it says. One day, an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question, "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus replied, "What does the law of Moses say? How do you read it?" The man answered, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Right, Jesus says. Right. Do this, and you will live. The man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" So we're going to stop there. We're going to pause there because I want to talk about this guy for a second. This man was feeling guilty. He gave the answer, right? And Jesus says, "Absolutely, good job. Now go do that and you'll live." But that bothered the man. He felt guilty. So what he wanted to do is he wanted to define who his neighbor was. Because, see, he wanted to love some people, but not others. He wanted to exclude some people from that love. And he wanted to justify himself in doing so. And so he wanted Jesus to define the boundary line. Who is my neighbor? And in truth, what he wanted to do is he wanted Jesus to justify him not loving those people. So I want to ask you, who are those people for you? We all know who it's easy to love, right? We know those people, right? Maybe it's for you, it's your family. Maybe it's your church family. Maybe it's the neighbors that are right next door to you, whatever. But who is it that's outside of that box? Who is it that it's hard to love? Because that's what this man was saying. He's saying, well, you know what? I want you to define this, Jesus, and I really want you to define it the way I define it. These are the people I think are my neighbors. And I'll love them, but not those people. But Jesus does something different. Instead of defining who his neighbor was, Jesus says, no, I'm going to define the love of a neighbor. And his definition goes something like this. Real love is treating everyone like you want to be treated. Real love is treating everyone, that means the people in the box and outside the box, everyone like you want to be treated. And Jesus defines this kind of love by telling a story. And listen to this story. In Luke chapter 10, verse 25 through 37, verse 30 says this. Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling on a trip to from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Let me give you some background to this story. From Jerusalem to Jericho, there was a very rocky, mountainous area, and it was sometimes barely inhabited, right? But it was a well-traveled road. Okay? However, there were caves. There was a lot of hiding places where bandits could pop out at any moment, and so it was also a dangerous road. The first man to come across this beaten-up man was a priest. And the priests were the priests of the temple. And so they would take care of the sacrifices, they would hold the services for all the people. Basically, in our vernacular, in our day and age, it would be this equivalent of like a pastor. Okay? This was the pastor. And he sees this man on the side of the road, and he walks on the other side. The next guy, a Levite, the Levites were the assistants to the priests, right? They handled all the little things, all the holy articles and all that kind of stuff. So let's just say, it's probably not a great analogy, but let's just say they're like the assistant pastor, okay? Just to kind of help us to relate to this. They were like the assistant pastor. So these were like religious leaders, right? They were the guys that everybody else looked up to for guidance, for direction. They were kind of the people that taught what God wanted us to do. So they were supposed to be the examples, right? And both of them walked on the other side of the road. Now let's get to the third man, the Samaritan. The Samaritan, the third man, he was a Samaritan. Samaritans were hated by the Jews. And I want to share with you why. Several hundred years before this story, the kingdom of Israel was one nation, okay? And it was called the kingdom of Israel. There was some internal stuff, and it was kind of like a civil war, and they basically divided into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom, they kept the name Kingdom of Israel, okay? And they made their capital city the city of Samaria. The southern kingdom called themselves the Kingdom of Judah, and they made their capital city, the city of Jerusalem. Okay? Now, after that happened, in 722 BC, Assyria, this nation of Assyria, they attacked that northern kingdom. They attacked and defeated them. And what they did is they took captive most of the people, and they brought them back to Assyria. However, they left this remnant. Okay? I don't know how many, but let's just say like 1,000 or maybe 2,000 people still living in that northern kingdom. Jewish people. But then what they did is they got people from all different nations, all different languages, all different religions, and they said, okay, all of you, you're going to go move right into that northern kingdom, and you're going to settle the land. And so they did. And as they settled that land, they began to intermarry with those Jewish people, those northern kingdom Jewish people. Not only that, but they began to influence them to, instead of worshiping the one God of heaven, they began to worship multiple gods. Okay? Now, not long after that all happened, the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, they got attacked by Babylon, right? Babylon comes in, they take them captive. But several years later, they say, okay, we're going to send 43,000 of you back to Jerusalem to rebuild your city. Okay? So they go back to rebuild their city, but those northern kingdom Jews, right, try to stop them. And so now there's this anger, this hatred between them. Because those northern kingdom, you might call them half-breeds, right? Because they're mixed. They're not full-blooded Jewish people anymore. And they worship all these other gods. They're called Samaritans because their capital city was Samaria. And the full-blooded Jews who were living in Jerusalem, they hated them. And those Samaritans hated the Jews. They did not get along. They were enemies. It was so bad they would not even talk to each other. They had nothing to do with each other because of this animosity, this anger. So each of these three guys, they saw this man on the road. They saw this hurt, bleeding, dying man on the road. Two of them saw him as a nuisance. They saw him as a problem. They saw him as a danger. If they stopped and helped, they would leave themselves open to attack. They saw him as too big of a problem, and they avoided him by walking on the other side. But the Samaritan, you know what he saw? This enemy, this man who not only did this Jewish man despise, but he also despised this man who was on the ground. You know what he saw? He saw himself. He saw himself. You see, he put himself in the shoes of that man lying on the ground, and he said, what would I want someone to do for me if I was in his place? If I was the one beaten, if I had left a little bit earlier and got here when the robbers were here, and I was the one beaten, and I was lying in that ditch, what would I want someone like me who's passing by to do for me? He put himself in the shoes of that beaten man. When he looked into his face, he didn't see a problem, a nuisance. What he saw was he saw himself. And he had compassion. He had compassion. Despite the differences between them, despite the animosity between them, he had compassion. You see, you and I, when we see someone in need, we need to look past the person's perceived worth, and we need to treat them like we would want to be treated. You see, true compassion is not just an emotional feeling. It's an act of the will. You choose to be compassionate. I think that's where this lawyer who came to Jesus missed the boat. He cared about the people he liked, but not the people that he didn't. He was willing to show compassion. He was willing to love people that he liked, people that he felt comfortable around. Think about this. I want to say this right now. In our nation, there is such a division going on right now politically, between conservative and liberal, between Democrat and Republican. There's such animosity going on, and I'm not here to side with either side. I just want to point this out because I want you to understand there's such animosity right now. This story, as I was studying for this message, it began to reveal to me there's such similarities between what the Jewish man and the Samaritan man probably felt towards each other. So I want you to think about this. If you saw whatever the opposite of what you are is, if you're conservative, if you saw a liberal, if you're a liberal and you saw a conservative lying in a ditch, or if you saw them in need in any way, would you respond like this man? Would you love them? Would you put yourself in their shoes and have compassion? Because this is the point of Jesus' story. This is what loving your neighbor means. He wants us to put ourselves in their place and ask, what would I want someone like me to do if I was that person? And then he wants us to do it. That's what loving our neighbor means. It's not just loving the people that we like, the people that are in our little circle. It's loving everyone this way. You know, I think I told this story once before, but I'll tell it again because it applies to this message. But when I was in college, I spent a month and a half in Mexico at an orphanage serving. And part of my time down there was, or my job, was that I would run errands into the States. They would give me a car, and they would have me go, buy something or pick somebody up or whatever. And I remember this one particular day, they gave me this beat-up truck, right? And they said, okay, we want you to go to the States. And I don't even remember what I was supposed to pick up, but they said, okay, go. And I went. And I went to go pick it up. And I crossed the border, and it was like maybe 5-10 minutes I was past the border into the United States. And all of a sudden, this truck breaks down. And so I pull off to the side of the road, and it won't start. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Because I'm in San Diego. I'm really far from the orphanage, which is actually across the border. I don't know anybody in San Diego. I'm like, what am I going to do? And so I get out. I know very little about cars, but I know enough that I'm like, maybe there's something I can do. I lift the hood. Of course, there's nothing I can do. Nothing works. And I'm sitting there, and I'm watching people just pass me by. And my thought was that it was probably the alternator or something like that, or the battery, I should say. And if I just got a jump, this thing would come to life, and I'd be on my way. And as I'm sitting there, I keep seeing people pass by, and just the hour goes by, and people are just passing by, and I'm thinking to myself, just one. I just need one. Just one person to stop and help me. Just one. Hours go by. Hours go by. And I'm frustrated at this point. I'm mad at these people. Why won't they stop? I put my hood up and everything so they know there's something wrong. Why won't they stop? And in that moment, I made a decision because I realized I was a little convicted. God has a way of turning things around on you when you get upset. He was like, how many times have you passed by? How many times have you walked by somebody in need? And I made a decision. I said, you know what? I'm going to do my best to stop and help if I can. From now on, I'm going to do that. Because I don't want to be that guy that passes by. I've been that guy who sat in the car just going, please stop. Just one person. That's all I need. For a lot of us, we're willing to have compassion, and we're even willing to help out a little bit. But I want you to see something about this Samaritan guy. This Samaritan, he didn't just stop until, he didn't just stop and help a little bit. He continued, he dug deep, and he did not stop until the need was met. I want you to see this. Well, listen to this. In Luke chapter 10, verse 35, it says this: the next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. Think about that for a moment. He carried this guy all the way to this inn. And then when he got there, he didn't go, okay, hey, can you pay for yourself? Is there somebody you can contact? He said, no, here, I'll pay the bill. And then, if there's more to be paid, I'll pay that too. He spared no expense. He didn't just do a token job of helping this man. He did his very best to meet that need. Whenever we choose to serve the needs of other people, there's always a cost involved, right? Cost of our time, our emotions, sometimes our finances, sometimes all. We need to be willing to give until the need is truly met. Not just give a token, right? Not just give a token, but give until the need is met. You know, Jesus basically describes three types of people that are present in our world. First, there are the robbers, the people that are like the robbers who look at others and say, you know what? Everything you have is mine, and I'm going to do whatever I can to take it from you. But then there's the people like the priest and the Levite who say, everything that's mine is mine, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep it. But then there's the people like the Samaritans who say, everything I have is yours, and I'm going to do whatever I can, whatever I have to help you and meet your need. And the question is, which one are you? Because Jesus is telling this story because he's describing what it means to love our neighbor. How we should treat people in need. And the question is, do we love like Jesus wants us to love? Listen to what Jesus says to the religious leader after the story. He says, now which one of these three would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, the one who showed him mercy. Then Jesus said, yes, now go and do the same. You know what's interesting? This Samaritan, in Jesus' story, this Samaritan was our model. Our model for how to love. Our model for how to treat people in need. But you know what? He wasn't a superstar. He wasn't some special person. He was just an average person like you, like me. But he knew how to love. He knew how to love. He knew how to love the people around him. Not just the people that he liked. Not just the people that had the same political ideas that he had. He knew how to love everybody. He treated everyone like he would want to be treated. It didn't matter who they were. It didn't matter what they believed. It didn't matter whether they were Democrat or Republican or whatever. He loved them. He just kept seeing himself in their shoes, in their face. And he began to treat them like he would have wanted to be treated.